Hey there, welcome to the channel. So today I want to take a look at the situation with the drought in the Southwest and specifically the water levels in Lake Mead. All right, so here we have a chart of the Lake Mead average content and change. So the red bars are the change here, and then the blue is the average content. So here the content is in acre feet. So that's like an acre with 1 foot of water on it. That's the measuring there. So you can see in the blue line here that, this thing ever since 1998, 2000, where it peaked out at 25 million. And notice I'm using content. So I'm trying to remove some of the variable with the levels, right? So the levels are important because you get below a certain level. Um, you can't generate power at both Lake Mead and Lake Powell. And also, you get below a certain level, you get below the intake pipes, you get dead pool, et cetera, at Lake Mead. Now, what happens is, and you can see here that, we've been on the decline. The content in Lake Mead has been dropping for literally since 2000. So you're talking 22 years, it's pretty much on the decline. So it's really kind of a very bad situation here. Now, one of the things that I did is I tried to look at I'm trying to look at content here. And so they have the data. So this is really good. So the average content as of 2022, I had done these numbers before, and you see that Lake Mead has 8 million acre feet. Powell has 6 million. But one of the things is I kind of want to take them together. And then I also looked at some other ones because you have Blue Mesa Dam and Flaming Gorge. And you notice that some of the time that they'll be transferring water between these. So, for example, they might do a release from Blue Mesa, which is further upstream, to try to get the levels up at Powell and something like that. Now, if you just look at Lake Mead on its own, if you take the average content over the 5 year average of the change in the content, so you average how much water you're losing over the last 5 years, it doesn't look that bad. It's like Lake Mead looks like it has, hey, 23 years of water left. Okay. And then at Lake Powell, well, that doesn't look so good. It looks like you only have 4 years of water left. Okay. So that's the calculation that I'm doing. I'm doing this simply, the change or the average of the change divided into the current estimate of what they have in there. Okay. Now, what you can do though is if instead of doing the average of the last 5 years, you just take the change so far in 2022, which is a little more aggressive, then you only have 3 years in Powell and 6.8 in Lake Mead. And then we could do some other, so this would look pretty dire to say you only have 3 years of water left in Lake Powell. That's kind of should be really, really scary. But one of the things is that like 50, you see different things, but 50 to 75% of the water being pulled out of Lake Mead, for example, my understanding is when you look up, it's like being used for agriculture. So if you drop the draws by 50% by just like killing off all the farms, then you basically double the amount of time that you have left given the current situation. Now, what you can do is you can go upstream and look at some other ones like Blue Mesa and Flaming Gorge and try to put them together. But you notice they're very small. These other dams are much small. So when you look at it, if I look at the total content, I have Mead and Powell together is 14.4 million. Add the others, you get 17.5. So it's like 3 million in the other dams, the Blue Mesa and the Flaming Gorge. So it's really difficult. It's not as much water there. So now taking the 5 year average, then you're out of water of the Mead Powell combined amount, you're out in just under 8 years. Okay. And if it's like another 2022, then it would be 4 years. So this is if we kind of keep with the current drought. So you can kind of guess here, you're looking at, hey, in 5 years, the Southwest is going to run out of water. Okay, so let's look at some of the graphs of the more recent data. If you look here, here's a map of the dams. So you can see down here, here's the Colorado River, and you can see that you have Hoover Dam over here. So you have your Lake Mead, and then you have your Lake Powell up here, Glen Canyon Dam, and then we have all these other ones. So what's kind of interesting is you see that there's a lot of dams here, but these are the two biggies down here, and then here's the Flaming Gorge up here. So one thing you can say, Flaming Gorge, and there's Blue Mesa. So one of the things that you can say is like these are, Flaming Gorge is up here in Upper Utah, and this Blue Mesa is right in the heart of Colorado. So this is kind of, these are kind of maybe where a lot of the water collects and stuff like that. And then, it collects into the river and then would go down into that. So if we just look currently where we're at, and we look here, this is Lake Mead. So we can see that we've come off. Now, look, we always come off this time. So I'm looking at like the 2022 to 2017. We always come off. It's just that we're at a really bad level. In 2019, we're at the peak of 1086, and they were at 1067. So we've come off, and a little water's coming in, but it's not really looking very good. And then if we look at Lake Powell, this guy here, we see kind of similar situation here. What's happening is water is kind of coming in, but it looks like they've put some water in basically. If you look over here to Flaming Gorge, so at the start of May, yeah. So in the middle of May here, what happened was um, they basically did a release from the Flaming Gorge Dam. So they're trying to get some water out of there and put it in other places. But if you look at Flaming Gorge, it's at the lowest point it's been in the last 7 years. So that one looks kind of not good as well. And then if you look over here at the Blue Mesa, you can see that this is the one that maybe is a little better, because you can see that the water level has kicked up here. Now this must be catching. If you look back here at the Blue Mesa, so Blue Mesa is over here right in Colorado. So this must be catching a lot of that, the actual runoff. So, but what you can see here as well is that if you compare 2022 to, for example, 2019, so let's try to unclutter it, and you kind of look at that, you can see that, hey, we only came up halfway of what we normally come up in 2019. At least in 2019, you had a huge run up in water. And then in other years, some of these other years, you didn't have much of a run up in water. And then you can see this drop here. This isn't artificial. This isn't artificial back in 2017. But generally, they all start going off. So the point is, you're at a low level. You almost got to where you were in some of the previous years, but it's still kind of looking really bad there. So let's go, try to think about the consequence of this. Stevie knows all. um, so I think that if we kind of look at the situation that we're in, it's something like 40 million people rely on the Colorado River water. Vegas relies on like 90% of its water comes from Lake Mead. If we look at the data that we have, and we're looking at something like 5 years of water left, given the current scenario, that's pretty horrific. We are looking at a situation that is going to be like the Great Dust Bowl. So let's just talk about that a little bit. If you ever saw that movie Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey, and what happened is, that's a more modern version of it, but they're interviewing people, or there's have part of the movie where they're interviewing people who lived through the Great Dust Bowl. What happened back in the Great Depression? So this would be a little bit of the history. In the 20s, we had what called the Roaring 20s, and it was a big party. It was a big party. There was a lot of, the Great Gatsby is set in that time. And it was a pretty fun time. The economy was doing really good, lots of jobs, lots of, people just having a good time. And part of that is, may very well be a response to the end of World War I, which was really horrible on the whole world. World War I ended in 1918 or 1919. Yeah, 1918. And so after that, at some point, we have the 20s where, basically things are going really well. Well, the hangover, the stock market crash in 1929, and the hangover was really the Great Depression of the 30s. Now, the 30s, part of that was what was called the Dust Bowl. Now, the Dust Bowl was the central part of the U.S., the breadbasket, the farming center of our country, basically had a big drought. And among other things, the way they had mismanaged the land and all that, as well as the droughts that they had, they basically, the soil was gone. So everything dried up, and the soil basically got blown away. And what would happen was, the soil, just became dirt, and it would just be dusty, sort of like sand dunes, but it would be like darker, kind of a dirt sand dunes. And what would happen is you would have these huge storms. The wind would pick up, and there was no trees because it was all flat plain, and the wind would pick up these huge dust storms, huge. And they would call it the Dust Bowl, and it would be like you'd have to be like trying to put wet towels to try to keep the dust out, and it would be everywhere. And kids were getting sick because of the breathing all the dust and all that. And of course, it was just an ecological disaster. It's like, okay, so food wise, you weren't able to grow any food. Now, the consequence of this was actually that you had a mass migration of people leaving the Midwest where this was happening. And part of it was because why? Because you couldn't survive. You didn't have water, you didn't have rain, so your crops couldn't grow, and you couldn't survive. And so you had this mass migration. So what is the comparable nature to what we have now? Well, the current situation in the Southwest is we're looking at a very similar situation because we're running out of water. Um, as far as we don't really have any plans going on as to how to address the issue, in other words, getting more water. And if you look at it and you say, as we talked about in that data, you look at it, and if it is true that about 50% or more, or 75% is agriculture, that's going to be where it's going to start, right? So basically, they're going to go and they're going to have to start cutting water to farmers. Now, I live in California, and we'd go visit family up in Northern California. I live down in San Diego. And when you drive up there, along the five, I mean, there's sections where you drive an entire hour at 80 miles per hour, right? And you'll just see nothing but like walnut trees and stuff that are all dead. And in the farms, and they have these signs up, Dust Bowl caused by, California, by the California government or whatever, complaining about that. So already before this, even 10 years ago, you already had restrictions on water because we're getting short on the water already. And this has been affecting many farmers already. But if it's true that, a significant portion, if like one third of all our vegetables in the US come from this region, come from the Colorado River water, then that's where the first cuts are going to happen. So I think the first thing that's happening is that you're going to see spikes in food prices because they're going to have to. They're going to have to be like, look, when you look at some of the data, you can see that there's already been a lot of conservation in terms of like watering lawns and that kind of stuff. Sure, it still happens, but a lot of people have gotten rid of that stuff. I mean, there's already been a lot of water conservation. Now in San Diego, we fortunately have a little bit of desalination, but not enough. It brings in approximately something like 10% of our water supply, which is better than nothing, but still not enough. So this is going to be the first thing to be affected. They're going to cut back on the farms, and that's going to cause food prices to spike even more than they already are. Okay. Because if you're not able to grow food out here in the desert, then there's going to be less supply of food, and the food is going to cost more. That's just, where we're at. So from my view, that's the first effect that's going to happen from this whole thing. Now, the next thing is at some point, if we don't really start getting some water, and water in a way that is helpful, right? You need, you need water that comes in, and you get soaking rains that actually start replenishing the water supply. Sometimes we have these like arc storms or whatever, or atmospheric rivers, and it's like really rainy, and the problem is a lot of that maybe doesn't get captured. Now what happens is, so that would be the first step. The second step would be like, look, they're cutting back more and more on water. And at some point, there just isn't going to be any water. I think it will just be a surprising thing. But I think that day is coming where Vegas is going to be like, look, there's just no more water. The water level at the dam at Lake Mead is dropped below the straw, and they're not going to be able to do anything. They're going to have no solution to that problem. And when that happens, that's going to be like, okay, it's like really a problem. So what is the effect? The effect is that, okay, you're going to have all these people moving. They're going to be like, well, look, I don't have water for shower. You can't bring in the amount of water that you need, right? We have to understand, look, you can't bring in enough water to supply Las Vegas. It's just not going to happen. You can't do that. Um, you could do it through massive projects, like for example, if you want to start building massive water projects that are going to get water from the Mississippi, the East Coast over to the West Coast, that could do it. But in terms of something near term, tanker trucks or whatever, that just is not going to work. So you're going to start seeing people move out of the most immediate areas. Now it's going to be very interesting because as we've seen here with the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we've seen that countries in Europe that have been very green, they're starting to fire up coal plants again, which is a rather amazing thing. But they're like, look, they're desperate. They're desperate because they're like, look, we're trying to not use the Russian gas. Russia is not turning the gas all the way back on, and they're literally going to have people that very well could be freezing to death in the winter. And so they know this is coming. So they're trying to get the coal fire plants up. So the first thing that's going to happen here is that, look, everyone's going to be screw the environment. That's what's happening. Okay, so that's another item that's going to happen. So basically, I can imagine that if Vegas goes dry, they're going to be like, okay, so in San Diego, I would hope that we would be like, okay, look, we're going to desal at a massive scale because we can do it. We have the Pacific Ocean here, so we're going to just fire up the projects, just dump all the environmental impact. It's just forget it. It's going to be like, no, we don't care. We're just rushing it through. We're going to do it. But however, expanding from 10% to a much more significant percent of water for like San Diego, which is a small, very small city compared to like LA. I mean, it takes 10, 20, 30 years. So the problem is you have this huge gap, right? It's just you do not have enough time to do it. And so what you're going to see is mass migration. My guess is you would see it first out of Vegas. Now, probably not. You'll probably see it out of other small towns and small cities on the outskirts. Like apparently, something happened with um, something happened with Lake Las Vegas where they had to get water from somewhere else because they were getting it. So basically, it's a big lake in the desert, but the thing is, they have to keep replenishing it, and they've been doing that. And they just go buy the water. Okay, well, it was coming, I guess, from Kirkland, but Kirkland is run out of water, or their tap is run out, or something's wrong there. So now they're going to go get it from Vegas Authority that has a third tap. Okay, fine, but the point is, so it may be, in fact, that Vegas won't run out first, but it'll be the smaller cities around Vegas that will have the issue first. And so when you start seeing this happen, this is going to be a very big canary in the coal mine. And so you're going to start seeing mass migration. So what you will see is like people will start hedging their bets. So if you're in the outskirts, a smaller city outside of Vegas, and you're like, okay, my city is like the water's gone, it's gone. And they try to do something, but it's like it's not working. You're like, okay, literally the tap is dry. So what are you going to do? So at first, maybe they're like, well, I work in Vegas, and so I'm going to try to move to Vegas. So you see this movement of people into Vegas, and then when Vegas runs out, they'll move from town to town, and the water runs out here, water runs out there. Then they'll just keep moving around. And so you're talking mass movement. And the other thing that will be happening with this is people aren't going to be buying the homes, because think about it. You're not going to buy the home. Like if you're sitting there and you're like, hey, I lived in Kirkland outside of Vegas, or some other town, maybe further out, that is even more vulnerable. I mean, Kirkland, that's a big city. I mean, and that's where like a lot of the people live. So that's not a good example. But there's other places where, look, the water's going to get cut off, and the people that like had homes there, they're not going to run out and buy a home, because they're going to be like, they're going to realize like, hey, it's temporary. If I go some other place, maybe I'll get a couple years out of this other city before it runs out of water and I got to move again. So I'm not going to buy. I mean, I'll just rent something, right? So you can see that you're going to have all these people running around. The prices to rent are going to be huge. The price to buy will still probably be on the high side, because people will get stuck this, all right, I got to buy something, I got to need a place to live kind of a situation. So you're going to see these massive flows of people around the world, and these people are going to be very broke, like people that own homes in these cities that don't have water anymore. They're going to be broke. And so there, it's not going to be like, oh, people are going to have money and it's going to be in their, $500,000 RVs. It's going to be like, oh yeah, they have maybe $100,000, $200,000 RV, but that's all they have, and they lost, in California, $1 million home, and so they're not flush with money. All right. That's what's going to be happening. And then, in reality, they're liable to be very poor before they get to that point. So I think that's what the setup is right now. We're going to have mass migration. Now, something has to be done. If you got 40 million people, think about like LA, you can't have the population of LA just be hopping in their cars trying to find a place to live. I mean, that is an ecological human tragedy disaster. So, we have to start doing something. So we know what's coming. We know what's here. Like maybe really lucky and we start getting a bunch of really good, rain and snow this year, but you can't really plan for that. You can't really hope. So now the question is, what do we do? you know what do we do if you want it? And the problem is it's almost too late, right? Because anything you would think of doing to resolve this issue, it's almost too late. But you could put a huge effort in and do it. So here's the thing. So for example, if you said like when back in the 60s when it was like we decided, okay, we're going to go to the moon. Okay, fine. So you're going to print a lot of money. You're going to just spend ungodly amounts of money on going to the moon. Okay, so now if you decide, look, we're going to get water from the East Coast and we're going to use desalination, East Coast water transfers, and we're going to use that to resupply the entire Colorado River basin with water so that all these Southwest states will have water supply. Okay, so now there's two things that you need. First of all, you need power. You need lots and lots of power, and it's not going to be green power. It's got to be nuclear or nat gas. That's just what it's going to be because you're going to need it quick. You're going to need lots of it. And it's going to need to be reliable because you're going to need to move massive quantities of water, large distances. That's what it's going to be. And then what you're going to do is you're going to build some kind of pipe into like a tributary or somewhere up there into the St. Louis or the Missouri River or the Mississippi River. And there's some places way north where they're not as far away, but that's what you're going to do. And you're going to do massive pipes, and then you're going to have to build power plants. So you have the power to do it. And then that's what you're going to do. But that could take 10 years. If you look at these original projects, these are 5, 10, 15-year projects that for all these aqueducts and all this infrastructure that we're using now that isn't working, that's running out of its ability to supply water. So those are the kind of things that have to happen. And they will be fought bitterly by ignorant leaders that don't understand what's happening. And so I think it will just make the situation worse. Now, I'd like to think that when just the poop hits the fan, that like, okay, people decide like, okay, look, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do it. But in terms of things like Green New Deal, all that's gone because you got, look, and if you aren't really hepped up environmentalists, think about it this way: like 40 million people just running ramp shot around the country. I mean, just looking for a place to live because they don't have water. I mean, that's an environmental disaster. I mean, it is, and it is. And so that would just make things worse. So, whatever environmental problems you're going to have, which you will, if you connect basically whatever's feeding into the Mississippi River, the East Coast rivers, and the West Coast here, you're going to have invasive species. You're going to have all these problems, but it will get the job done. And you're going to have to manage that. And that's what it's going to be. And that's how you do it. But the problem is the gap, you would have had to start working on this stuff 10, 20 years ago. And we didn't. We were doing who knows what, but we didn't work on it. And because we didn't work on it, we don't have it, and we're not even close to it being there. And therefore, it's going to be a huge problem. Now, it's kind of interesting. So I'm trying to figure out where to go. Now, the thing is, we have kind of droughts everywhere, but you really have to go, look, it's this global warming. It's here. The climate is getting warmer. Now, maybe this is a really big super cycle, and this will, kind of change. It could be. It could be still, but on the other side of the coin, at this point, you kind of just you put the carbon in the atmosphere. It's kind of, you can debate with models like to what extent what is going to happen, but it doesn't matter. Like, and this is really a key thing that this really annoys some people, but look at this point, it doesn't matter because it's already done. It's already happened. So now you just have to deal with it. So now you have to pick which environmental disasters you want to deal with. And I would say that, 40 million people without water is going to be a disaster. And so you're going to have to extend that out. So what's going to happen here? I have no faith in our leaders, so I don't think they're going to do anything until they're really really forced to do it. And even then, they may not. I don't have any confidence at all that we're even capable of electing the leaders that can understand this stuff. I mean, it's not hard, but um, you do have to like just use a little common sense, and we just have lost that in terms of our political leadership. They've just lost that because they're all their whole focus is on what is the optics of what I'm doing. Does the optics look good for this group, that group? And you have this extreme environmental woke side that doesn't really care and doesn't understand about the real consequences of the decisions. You know, you have a lot of the practical environmentalists that do, and but there's a lot less of them, and those are the people that you can certainly work with and come up with solutions, right? But that's not everyone, and it's not really in the political leaders. So I think it's going to get really bad till it gets worse. Now, not unless we get lucky and we start getting a bunch of rain and snow, but at this point it seems rather unlikely. If at this point we end up that we're really in a situation where we aridification of the Southwest of the U.S., meaning that it's going to become a much more arid place, then you need like a permanent solution to the situation. I mean, because the reality in that is that the truth was that going back to the 20s or the 10s or 1900s, it made no sense. This part of the country was never sustainable. It can never support this population, and that's very likely. And if you see that, if you go to places like Four Corners and you go see the cave dwellings, that they don't know what happened to all these people. They have a lot of evidence in terms of you can just look at yourself like, wow, well, I mean, 200 homes here, really big stuff. I mean, there was a society living here for quite a long time, was able to build all this stuff. Well, where are they? They're gone. And one of the thoughts is that it's basically a climate change situation, right? They basically a situation because there's signs that there was more water in that region than there is now, where now it's very, very dry in that region. And this has, of course, happened in other parts of the world too. You talk about the Nile, talk about Egypt, where, there's some, hieroglyphs and stuff where it's like there's palm trees or there's more water and stuff. So, things do shift. And part of that is natural. There's been a lot of shifts in climate well before industrialization. So it's not all just a human thing, but it certainly can be. So that's kind of what I see for this. I think it's really a challenge because I'm trying to figure out where to go. I know that I have to leave the Southwest or I have to not own anything so I can just pack up and move on a drop, you know. But the question is, where do you go? All right. Well, that's it for this one. Bye. Okay.